So I'm Craig Spiesel. I'm the Executive Director and President of the Online Trust Alliance. So we're a nonprofit organization comprised of a little over 120, 130 companies internationally that share this vision of improving trust and integrity of the internet and all the things. We have a very active working group called the IoT Trust Working Group that has, it's a public-private partnership with government agencies and many different groups involved. And what I'm going to share with you today is the trust framework that we unveiled at RSA this past year in an update on how it's being used today by multiple stakeholders. So, again, why do we care and who are we? Again, we have this mission of improving online trust. We're a vendor-neutral organization. We are not a trade organization. We're a 501c3 charitable organization. And we're also not a standards organization. There's a great work you heard from the earlier panel about standards. It's really about applying and accelerating the adoption of best practices and tracking adoption. So we have this global focus. We have many stakeholders involved. And so some of these organizations you're probably aware of, specific to IoT, the All Seeing Alliance, they're a part of us. Build It, Simplify as well. You have other organizations in the privacy side, Department of Commerce, ITU, we're very involved. We're part of their Smart City initiative. So we're really looking globally. But other than this, the companies that aren't on here, we have groups like Target. We have the Houston School District, the National Association of Realtors. They're all concerned about these connected devices and the implications, and also about how do we promote innovation. So, there's a lot of research out there, and you heard before, is the sky falling? I believe that we are not realizing the potential of IoT due to a lot of these different issues. And this is some data that came out early this year. Again, the concern about data and security. Again, who has access to the information? And it's interesting, over lunch I was talking with some investor groups, and this whole issue of data. And the business models are less about the device, but the long-term value of the data. And so we're thinking about those issues and how do we make that be balanced. So this is an article that came out just about 15 minutes ago, and it was interesting. They did multiple surveys that came out, and it said the security pros are thinking about security, obviously that's what they're thinking about, and consumers are saying about privacy, a concern about their data. And I think that's important, that when you look at these different aspects and who you ask, you're going to get different answers. And so no one's right or wrong, so to speak here. And we all know of the number of missteps out there. So this is about why we care. Why I care is really, this is what I am concerned about. It's the uncharted territory. It is the Wild West. We have rapid innovation, rapid emergence of products, and we have everything from the startups in the garages to established players to, I would say, mature companies that are cobbling together connectivity. And how they approach security and how they approach privacy are uniquely different. And it's concerning. I speak to the startups and they're saying, well, we're going to deal with that later. We got to get the product out. If we don't make this milestone, we don't get any funding. If we don't have any funding, so support and security, we'll get to that. So that's concern, because what happens when a few hundred or thousand of these devices are out there and they become bricks or they become vulnerable because there's no support. But this is about why I care. So I mentioned a year ago, January, we formed a separate working group as part of our organization. We've had multiple face-to-face meetings. We meet every other week. And in last August, we released what we called our draft trust framework. At that point, it had 93 criteria. And I pushed back a lot to the working group saying that perfection is the enemy of good here. We have to look at what's really realistically achievable in here. So we went through in August a call for public comments. We got about 100 comments, very diverse groups, again, very open, and all this is on our website. In October, we released a second draft. November, we had another face-to-face meeting. To make a long story short, at RSA, we released the framework. And actually, yesterday, we made a slight update to it to reflect the inclusion of Privacy Shield in Europe. And if those of you aren't following that, we need to be very concerned about the data elements of any data that's being transferred back and forth for any EU citizen. And then there's also something called the GDPR, but it's basically the Data Protection Directive that talks about how you secure the data and how you respond to a breach. And so we actually made that the 31st criteria. So we went from 93 down to 30, and then yesterday we added one more, 31 criteria. And now we're working on a scoring matrix that I'll walk through. So I'm going to very quickly go through these. I don't want to go through each one because each one could be an hour conversation. But again, what we actually focus on phase one is what we call the connected home and wearables. And it's not to mean that industrial controls aren't important. They're very important. In some ways, they're more important than others. But we can't boil the ocean here. So as a working group, again, we had to kind of keep focused. What lanes do we swim in? The connected car, we worked with I Am the Cavalry. We've testified on these issues on the connected car. But you know what? There's others that have more focus and expertise in that area. So that's where we're focused on right now. The core of this program is a code of conduct and a certification program. And there's many companies that are now looking to build this framework that I'll go through into there. And again, 31 principles. Security is obvious, privacy is obvious, but the big black hole, the big concern that we have is what we call sustainability. The long-term impact of the supportability, the life cycle issues of the security patching, the vulnerabilities, and also the transfer and ownership of that data. And as we think about that. So again, maybe you might think a light bulb, it doesn't matter. But if we think about a connected device that's in your home, a thermostat, or we think about a garage door opener, those things are going to transfer to other owners over time. How do we support those? How do you contact the user if there is a vulnerability? How do you patch it? A whole set of other issues that are beyond what we typically have thought about because it's not assigned to a specific user. So again, that's the three buckets that we look at here. So I'm going to blow through some of these because you guys really are experts in many of the areas. I guess the real point of this is any device, these issues are a three-dimensional issue. It's a physical device, in most cases, a mobile app, and then a cloud service. And you heard the guys from Intel speaking earlier. What they talked about mobile and mobile phones, that's been an issue from day one of having mobile apps. The challenge is it's amplified because now we're dealing with very personal, ultra-sensitive data on a wearable, and can that be patched? Is there firmware? So lots of different issues, and again, gets back into what we call the supportability, the data retention issues here. So a wide range of issues. But the good news is we think we're addressing it. The other point that I want to bring up is over lunch we were talking with a few folks about all these sensors out there. And that was a really good point. And this whole thought of all these sensors that are collecting what appear to be benign data points. So big deal if they know what time you come and go out of your office. Maybe they also big deal that how many times or how many people are in your executive conference room or the boardroom. But sometimes that data could also be collected and used. Maybe it's, you have a competitor that's looking at it. So we have to kind of think out of the box. But again, if we look at that, there's a tremendous amount of data that looks at someone's lifestyle in their home, what appliances they're using. Every electronic device has a signature of electrical consumption. Who has access to that? So these are some things that we think about, and IoT just brings it to the forefront. So I'm going to kind of just walk through it, just show you a little bit. I want to add a lot of time here. You probably can't, I'm sure you can't read this. Yeah, so the good news is we're going to have the ability to get downloads. If you give me your card, I'll send you a deck right away. But what this is not showing up here in the top is we actually designed this with two columns here. One was for the connected home and one was for wearable technologies. And when we went through this originally, we thought there's some criteria would be applicable to both. The other aspect is if you think about from the standards world, a should versus a must. So a must is a solid dot, a should is the donut, so to speak. So some of the things that talk about not only the device, but as we see more, as devices become more popular, you can expect the criminals are going to try to target those consumers. And how they do it today? Spear phishing, deceptive forged emails. So we also built into this saying, you know, it's not just the physical security of the device, it's how do you push the patches down? Are they signed? Are they, you know, can they be verified? And how are you communicating? And we've already seen this for Fitbit and also for Nest devices, emails that are spoofed and forged, because they're saying, hey, we know there's millions of users out there. We only, you know, it's free. Doesn't matter. We just need to get a few hundred people to click on it. We got ransomware in their system and game over for them. So we think that's very important. So that's a good example of something that's a should. It's not inherently designed on the security of a device, but we should be thinking holistically of that entire consumer experience. By design, the other thing is, you'll look at this and you read this, it's not about standards. By design, the framework is supposed to be evergreen. So we talk about you should encrypt your data flows between your device and your application through the acceptable common technologies available today. So we don't say what those are, because they're not only going to evolve day to day, between your sector you're in, your industry sector, it may be different. You know, so, but ultimately this is built into NIST standards are behind this. And we have a long resource guide that also provides more resources here. But some things, every one of these things you'll see in the list, you can attribute to a vulnerability or a misstep of a company. So for example, all software patches must be either signed or otherwise verified from a trusted source. Well, we know with Vizio TV, they had some unsigned patches that came out when were malicious. So I'm not picking on them. And these are all, I don't even think these are technical. These are operational discipline areas more often than not. Another one, number 5, is again, companies must have a system to receive, track, and respond to external vulnerability reports. Well, how many times have we heard that a company was notified and didn't respond? Well, I will tell you the FTC now, as part of reasonable security practices under Section 5 of the FTC Act, is now looking, did a company fail to respond to a responsible disclosure? So this is less technical. And how do you solve that? Well, it's pretty easy. You have a form. But I can tell you, we just got done an audit of 1,000 companies. Now the good news is majority of them had no problems. But about 2% of them we were able to observe vulnerabilities. For that 2%, we notified them. We had absolutely zero response from those companies that we did not have a relationship. Well, how do we contact them? Well, you send them, you go to the who is, you look at their technical contact, you know no one responds those. You send an email to abuse@foo.com. So you send an email to ceo.com. So in that case, we were trying to be responsible and report what we saw and observed, and they didn't have a vehicle to vet those. Now, as it turns out, in 2 cases, the Wall Street Journal found out, they contacted the companies, and the companies ended up saying, oh, we did see that email, it's in a junk mail folder, but we have a policy, we don't respond to unsolicited mail. That was not a good story for them. But my point is, have a system in place. This can be, you know, you want to make sure it can't be botted. And there's also, if you're interested in this, I'm happy to talk to you later, we're part of a working group with NTIA, which is part of the Department of Commerce, on responsible vulnerability disclosures, on how do you do that. And ultimately the message there is for companies and device manufacturers is have a welcome mat. Don't treat the researchers like, you know, they're all, you know, scum of the earth. And that's this problem that happens is the researchers or the white hats are treated that way and then they go public. You don't want that to happen. Or at least you want to make sure you're managing that. One of the other things, authentication credentials must not be limited to password, not limited to passwords, should be salted, hashed, and or encrypted. We aren't saying which one, but how many times do we hear about those passwords are in the clear? So I'm just giving you a flavor. These are very achievable out of the box. You know, my Comcast router, when the Comcast guy, The password was password, and username was admin for the admin controls. And the Comcast guy said, but I'm doing that for you. And I said, and my wife actually spit out her coffee. She laughed. She said, you're saying that's the wrong guy. But he actually had a really good point. He said, you don't understand what it's like when I have to go in a home, the wife or the husband, whoever's there, doesn't have it, and I've got to reset everything, and then they're panicking because nothing in the house works. So I'm trying to help them. So an interesting perspective, but clearly I then joked, so I said, so where's your area of responsibility geographically? And then I said, so I could just drive down the street and sniff out any of those boxes. I don't even have to guess. You've told me what your passwords are. So he didn't, but he wasn't coming from a security mindset. And really the lesson learned is we have to look at it. It's not just how we manufacture, but whether you have your own support people on the phone, how they handling it, or if you're relying on contractors, and more of these devices are. So, but that gives you a flavor. Again, protocols, devices should be generally accepted security transmission protocols. All personal identifiable data in transit and storage must be encrypted. A lot of people don't like that. I will tell you that's when we had a lot of pushback, because they say, well, you know what that's going to cost me? We had a wearable technology guy tell me that's going to cost me 11 cents. And of course my response was, and what's your point? But in his eye, that was going to keep him from making his margin. And the other part is, well, our firmware doesn't support it. And then the next part was, there's going to be greater power consumption. We get it. But you know what? There's a certain cost to doing business, and then in this case, that company would maybe not qualify. So, but the good news is, you know, firmware is being adopted, power consumption is under control, and these are things I think aspirationally companies should really try to achieve too. So that's the security bucket. User access and credentials. You know, we all know they were joking about passwords. We know we have to get away from passwords in a sense. Again, we look at that as really important. Necessary, unique passwords, reset, two-factor, those are key parts in here. How do you do that? We don't want to have a situation with like Apple and iCloud that someone could reset it, and again, it wasn't going to a two-factor authentication to verify who the owner was back there. So certain areas there. Brute force, notification, breach response plans. I mean, this is really basic. But you got to assume every product is going to have a vulnerability. And everyone jokes that when I say that, they know I was at Microsoft for, well, actually a period of like 17 years. And they say, well, no wonder you're saying that. But reality is, today's feature is tomorrow's vulnerability. So expect that. How are you going to respond? How are you going to respond to consumers? How are you going to respond to your investors, your stockholders, your business partners? So have a breach plan in place. And one thing we also have, it's available, again, it's free. We don't even ask you to register. We have a breach response plan you can download from our website that helps you walk through its templates, how to respond, thinking about messaging to different audiences, and so the areas there. So that's the second bucket. And the third bucket is privacy disclosures. So privacy disclosures is really important, because as more and more of these devices I mentioned, they're building a business model that's centric on data collection and data mining. Not necessarily bad, but how does a consumer or a business user find out about it? And if your answer is on page 42 of the EULA or privacy policy, that makes me a little uncomfortable. And certainly if you now think about you buy that TV at Costco, you get it in your car somehow because it's so big, you mount it on the wall, and now you go through the setup and you click yes, and if the argument is that's how we notify a user, I would suggest that's not the place to do it. So the good news is we're in discussions with Costco and Best Buy and Target for two aspects. One, those types of things, if those are core features that affect the functionality of the product, that should be disclosed on the exterior of the packaging. Now, that's easy on a large TV. It's pretty hard on a watch. So there's some ideas that we have here. So we talk about they need to be clearly and readily available for view prior to purchase. So one idea could be a Q code or different things. So we're not saying how to do that. We're just saying how to disclose it. And we think that's really important there. We also think about what is the commitment of product support past warranty? So there's a big distinction in consumer electronics. Typically 90 days is what you might find. Maybe it's 12 months, but that's about the warranty of the product. We aren't really thinking about the patching of the software. So we really say, we believe that patching of software should be in parallel or to the expected life of the product. And if you aren't going to be able to do that, then you say it. So again, we are only committing to 24 months of support patching of the product. Of course, no one wants to say that, but so that's a good example. Disclose the duration of security patch support. Such disclosure should be aligned with the expected lifetime of the device. So a baby monitor, maybe you're only going to have it for 3 years because a baby at that point you're less concerned, and I don't know, I don't want to offend anyone on that one. So maybe that's 36 months. We do know the average TV is 7 to 10 years, and that's from the Consumer Technology Association, so maybe a TV should have that. So these are thoughts, and the important part is build that into your business model because there's a cost to that. When you have great growth, you can support and absorb that, but as your product sales plateau, you're building financial reserves. And so when I talk to investors, they get a little concerned when I talk about that part of the curve. So again, conspicuously disclose what personal information is being collected and what's the purpose for it. So I have a Garmin device and I really like it. So you guys can probably sniff out the data right now, but one of the things, it has multiple levels of data sharing. Can I share the data with my contacts? So if there's another one on there. There's another one, it's with my cohorts. And their definition of a cohort is, for example, similar people my age, my weight, and activities. And so there's a good example. They say it's anonymous, and I believe that they're right, but I'm always concerned about how that data can be re-anonymized. But so having more granularity and control. But the good thing is in Garmin and most of the others, all that sharing is off by default, and none of that impacts the core functionality of the product that you're buying in the first place. Again, but we also say what features will fail to operate if it becomes disabled. So if you have a smart garage door opener and you decide not to use the internet connectivity, that garage door opener better still work as long as there's power. Data retention policies and such here. So that gives you a little flavor to walk through. And again, hopefully you understand that these are all updated. I mentioned yesterday we updated this, was 30, and we added number 28, comply with applicable international security and data transfer regulatory requirements. What was interesting is we had that on as a footnote, and what we found out is no one was using that. So until you put in the list, and so it's been interesting here. Again, post a history of material privacy policy changes for 2 years. So people go out there and they say, we've updated our privacy policy. Well, what changed? I don't know, right? So these are simple things on there. Provide device or service data erasure and zeroization in the event of loss or sale. I've lost my Garmin, geez, but I still have my logon information. Can I delete that information? Or if I sell my house, what about all that? So that's kind of, a very quick overview of the framework, give you some feeling. And let me show you how it's being used today. Also, there's another thing. We've now taken those criteria and we're applying a scoring matrix because they're not all equal. So there are certain things, for example, that, okay, maybe it's not perfect, but still would get a passing grade. There's others that are the should that maybe would be a failing. So this is in discussion right now, so I'm going to share with you, you're the first public group to see this. But for example, if you looked at a 100-point scale, so again, data transmission must be encrypted. Well, that's 10 points. Authentication credentials must be sorted, hashed, or encrypted. Well, that's an auto failure. If you're not doing that, game over. So that's kind of the model that we're looking at, certain things here. And you can, I'm sure you will, I can tell you our working group debates, well, why 5 points versus 4 points? And you know what, some of it's a flip of a coin. I don't know how many of you worked on working groups. We're really splitting hairs at that point. I mean, there are some people who say, let's make them both 4.5 and call it a day. It doesn't really matter. But so that's what we're trying to work with. If you're interested, we can share you more information on that. So where we are today, I mentioned earlier, we are, one of our members is the National Association of Realtors. They represent 1.1 million realtors. We publish two things, a home buyer, a renter's checklist for connected devices, and also a device for the holidays. So we're doing a lot with them right now. They're actually integrating this into a checklist at escrow. So think about it. You now buy or sell a smart home. Typically, you turn in your keys, the mailbox keys, your garage door openers. Now it's this checklist of what devices you have access with, what's the password. So it's kind of, it's almost like you need a button to reboot your house when you sell it or re-provision everything. But unfortunately, we know nothing's it's connected, but it's not a homogeneous dashboard. So they're really taking a good leadership. Houston School District, they're doing a pilot project. They actually found themselves very perplexed between their roughly 300,000 students and all their instructors. They have 300, I think, different campuses that are bringing in devices in the school. So there they've got a whole challenge of student privacy issues. So when I talked about there's different sectors and all the data security, and as everything gets connected to the school network, they're concerned. So it's very engaging and educational for me because you're hearing these different perspectives you never thought of. As I mentioned, that we have endorsement from the International Telecommunications Union in Geneva. We're partnering with the International Consumer Research and Testing Organization. That's about 30 consumer testing organizations. So we're doing a lot of work right now. So we're pretty excited about that. I'm not sure, I mentioned the connected home, that device. I have a few handouts about that. The other thing that we're also, I can't tell you, I think I may have told you, but I'm not going to tell you again, but we're working with two major retailers, and it's interesting, they're taking this framework and they're giving it to their buyers in the stores, the people that make the merchandising decisions, what do we buy? And their challenge when they came to us is, well, they know price points, they know margin, they know packaging, they know core functionality, but they're concerned about all the security issues. Two things, they don't want to have a product that becomes a problem for their consumers, and then they have egg on the face. They also don't want returns. So they're now using a version of this framework as an assessment or audit when their vendors come in, we're either ask that in a question or more appropriately, you give this back to us, and by the way, we need an official of your company to sign off on it. Don't just say, well, it was Bob the salesman or the distributor's rep. Get some accountability. So the good news is that's raising the awareness, and I think that's one of the biggest ways we'll see change brought up in the marketplace is by retailers doing it there. So we're working on that. There is one of our companies that's looking at a risk assessment tool that would basically ask a series of questions and come out with that. So we're trying to do some other things there. As I mentioned, we are a small nonprofit, so funding and grants are really key to what we do. But again, all these information are the baseline, and there is at least one company now that's building a certification program on top of this. So again, that's not our place. Think of us as more developing that framework and managing that, and perhaps licensing others or approving others who are qualified. So we're talking some of the big audit firms you might think about out there that start with 3 letters, maybe P's one of the, and there's a small W in there, or another company starts with A. Give you some ideas that we're talking to in that area. So that's a very quick overview where we have, and I've run through this. I know we started late, but certainly entertain your questions and comments and feedback. What are we doing good? What should we be doing? I mentioned here the framework, otalliance.org/IoT. All the documents are up there. The updated guide that, excuse me, I'm losing my voice. The updated framework that we posted today. There's also an effort with the NTIA. NTIA is part of the Department of Commerce. You should expect in September to hear about a workshop that we're doing with them, focused on the supportability issue. What does that really mean? What is patch management? So it's going to be a workshop. I'm not sure it's going to be in DC or Boston, but it's going to be in the East Coast. But that's the whole idea, is to bring stakeholders together. And they're also working on a parallel process on the vulnerability reporting. And if that's something you're interested in, I'm happy to connect you to that. So, time for questions. Anyone still awake here? Here we go. Test, let's see here. Test, 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 test. There you go.
Yes. Very loud. So, as you're looking into this, so more from a cyber aspect, are you including this into product liability and insurance?
Great question. So if everyone understands, so how is this tied to product liability and insurance? And that is, I think, a key issue for every company, especially as we think about bridging from security to personal safety, and as people are looking there. So we aren't directly looking at, but one of our members, we have 2 insurance companies that are also part of the working group, and they're looking at if companies doing this as part of their underwriting process of evaluating, and part of the problem from an insurance coverage perspective, if you think about traditional underwriting of a physical home or a building, it's pretty straightforward. And now we think about cyber insurance and also coverage for these things, the scope is changing. So what they're looking for is a part of their assessment, an audit of companies, are you doing these things and are you committed to those? And that's for cyber insurance and also for product liability. So that's as deep as I've gotten into that area, really. But I can, if you're interested in specifically, I can point you in some of the folks that are looking at insurance coverage. But again, one of the things that we, in our documents and our position and testimonies, let's face it, there's no perfect security, but there's also no excuse for blatant negligence either. So, we do think, and again, I don't anticipate, but it's real possible that I could see myself having to testify on someone's behalf. If a company is doing all these things, we think that that's reasonable. And they should be protected from both the baseless class action suits as well as regulatory oversight there. And I will tell you, in general, the Federal Trade Commission, as well as the FCC, they're not going to publicly sign off on this, but they have said they would be very hard pressed to bring action against any organization that is doing all of these things. So if you think about from a risk adverse, it's a risk assessment process we all have to do for every product. So you've got the microphone. Anyone else have a question here? Come on. You were nodding a lot in the back, so either you agree or someone paid you off to agree with me here today. So as we think about these issues, it's we want to avoid this calamity or this challenge. And one of the other things that keeps me up at night, and I will tell you, keeps Homeland Security up at night, is these unpatched devices that there's 100,000 of them installed, and 5 years from now that either hackers or hacktivists or terrorists want to simultaneously exploit those. And so we think about that as a real likely scenario. And so there's a lot of concern in that area. So think about, let's just say it's a garage door scenario, and let's say they're able to cycle those on and off to a point that they have a short circuit. And now you've got first responders diverting to that. It's not that the house is burning down, but maybe they're diverting from more of a critical issue. So these are the things that keeps me up at night. And this is, I will tell you, the White House and Homeland Security is concerned about that. So that's why we're so focused on the life cycle issues of what happens in these devices.